This talk focuses on how language and emoji coordinate to make meaning in social media discourse. In particular, we'll be looking at social media discourse about working from home, a social practice that has become increasingly common with the COVID-19 pandemic, due to the pandemic's impact on how and where people work. The work that I'm going to present today is part of a collaboration with Dr. Lorenzo Loggi, and we're currently working on a more extended version of what you're going to see today in the form of a book for Cambridge University Press, Emoji and Social Media, Paralanguages. Language-focused studies of emoji span a wide range of areas in linguistics, including pragmatic focus on emoji functions, semantic and corpus-based work on emoji meanings, sociolinguistic focus on social variables, age, gender, etc., relating to emoji use, and all manner of variation between these perspectives. And in fact, some studies will borrow aspects across these different areas. Most studies acknowledge an interpersonal function that emoji can enact. For instance, modulating tone, forging interpersonal alignments and solidarity, indicating humorous or sarcastic meaning, and negotiating politeness in interactions. And a lot of studies have recognised that these kinds of meanings can be made within, without, and beyond accompanying text, as Jus puts it. So the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a seismic shift in how and where people work and on how they interact and relate to one another. And we've seen substantial movement to working from home, which is likely to persist in certain circumstances and refashion existing work practices in novel ways. And people talk about this online, obviously, and emoji play an important role in how they communicate about their experiences of working from home. So in my data set, which I'll explain in a minute, there are emoji such as these, so the ones on the left clearly related to the experience of work and working from home, the ones on the right obviously related to illness and the pandemic. The data set explored in this study is a corpus of tweets containing any of the following case-insensitive search terms that you can see on the screen, so WFH, working from home, etc. And the aim was to retrieve a broad range of discourse about working from home. And I used a particular software, Social Feed Manager, to retrieve these tweets from the Twitter application programming interface, collecting every 30 minutes over 7 days in June 2021. So this resulted in a corpus of approximately 262,000 tweets, which after processing, so such as deduplicating, getting rid of retweets, etc., ultimately the corpus was about 24,000 English language tweets. Because of the kind of discourse analysis that I was undertaking, I needed, and my own language proficiency, I needed to work on English, but it would be important to, in future studies and bigger studies, work on languages other than English as well. So in the end, about 24,000 tweets containing emoji, so about 620,000 words. And convenience sampling approach was used for picking out examples for close discourse analysis. But this was augmented by some corpus-based work using regular expressions in Python to create a word frequency list, to create an emoji frequency list, which is slightly different and a little trickier computationally, and to use things like n-grams as a way into the discourse to see what was happening. So although a convenient sampling method is technically the method I was using to pick out my examples, it was a little bit more robust than purely picking out for convenience. So this is an example of a tweet from my data set. The advantage of working from home. I enjoy my homemade latte macchiatos. And you can see 3 of the hot beverage emoji presented at the end of the tweet. So in this talk, I'm going to be particularly focusing on experiential meaning, so how we construe our experience in language, and the focus will be on these kinds of what are sometimes referred to as object emoji. So before getting stuck into the discourse analysis I'm going to present, I need to say a few things about emoji encoding, just briefly. Emoji are encoded via the Unicode standard, an encoding standard defined by the Unicode Consortium. This standard is used across software, platforms and protocols worldwide in the processing, storing and interchanging of textual data for most languages. So there are several ways in which emoji can be encoded, including the following. So as a single unique code point, so something like this for encoding the hot beverage emoji that you're going to see throughout this presentation. Another possibility is a code point plus what's referred to as a variation selector. So this is essentially an invisible code point which indicates that the preceding character is to be displayed with emoji presentation. So that's the presentation on the right, rather than defaulting to text presentation, which is what you see on the left. You also might be familiar with skin tone modifiers that can change the skin tone in terms of how the emoji is presented. So something like these 2 code points changing the skin tone. Also special encoding for flags, so using regional indicator symbols. So you can see here the ones required to present the Australian flag. And also as kind of complicated tag sequences. So this is the tag sequence to present the flag for the Australian Capital Territory. And then what are referred to as keycap sequences. So something like this for encoding this little hashtag symbol on a button. Okay, so there's a range of ways. It gets quite complicated, but it's stuff that we need to pay attention to when we're processing emoji in corpora, because it can create a whole range of issues. So an example of such an issue is so the need to account for these kinds of encodings. The reason for this and the reason that it's important for corpus-based studies is that it can impact on how emoji are counted by whatever kind of software you're using to process your corpus and to conduct concordancing. For example, if emoji are decomposed into their base emoji and any standalone modifiers, this will impact how the word frequency list, for instance, is calculated. So an example here for the man singer emoji, which is encoded by the sequence you can see at the top, where one of the code points is the man emoji, one is the 0 width joinder, and the other is the microphone emoji. So depending on the software, man singer may appear as its own category in a frequency list, or it may instead contribute to the count of man and microphone categories. Another issue that we need to pay attention to when we're focused on how emoji make meaning is how they're presented across what Unicode refers to as vendors. So an example here of the laptop emoji presenting as what you can see now is in a browser, in Apple, Google, Facebook, Windows, Twitter, Samsung and Gmail. Okay, and depending on the choices in visual representation that are made across these vendors, they have the possibility to adjust or inflect the kind of meanings that are being made when a user puts an emoji in their message. Unicode also defines what are referred to as common locale data repository short names for each emoji. So when I refer to the hot beverage emoji, I'm using the CLDR short name. But these need to not be confused with, they should not be confused with the meaning of the emoji when it's being used by people in their messages. This is just a shorthand that Unicode have developed so that you can refer to a particular emoji using a natural language word. And they also obviously define other parameters such as the keywords, the actual code point, etc. So in terms of the lens that I'm using, the multimodal linguistic or semiotic lens that I'm bringing to thinking about emoji, I'm going to in particular be looking through an ideational lens, so focused on how experience is being construed using emoji, and I'll be drawing on concepts from systemic functional linguistics, a social semiotic perspective on meaning making. And when looking at ideational meaning, I'm going to in particular be focusing on the concept of what is referred to as convergence. So intermodal convergence, how language and emoji make meaning by coordinating with each other or in concert with each other or simultaneously. So this is I'll be using this kind of concept and also a social semiotic perspective, so looking at meaning in use in its functional context. In order to interpret the patterns of meaning observed in the corpus, a social semiotic framework for interpreting how language and emoji cooperate was used. This framework posits that emoji, in coordination with language, can enact three functions: an interpersonal function, so enacting relationships and values, for instance, via an evaluation; an ideational function, construing experiences as processes and participants in a clause; and a textual function, organising discourse into text, for instance, marking the theme in a clause. These are the three metafunctions defined by Halliday that form the basis of the social semiotic approach to language that is manifest in systemic functional linguistics. And we're going to be looking here today, focusing on ideational meaning, so how language and emoji coordinate to construe experience. So we're going to be considering how verbiage converges with image. So this notion of convergence is drawn from work on social semiotic work on paralanguage, how paralanguage coordinates with spoken language, for instance. So we're going to be looking at the co-construal of ideational meanings through this kind of convergence, which we can also think of as intermodal coupling relations. So how do language and image, or how do the body of the tweet and the emoji coordinate to make meaning, and in particular ideational meaning? So on the one hand, we have the verbiage with its ideational, interpersonal and textual functions, and image, so the emoji, which also can enact all of those kinds of functions. And we're considering what are the relations, the meaning-making relations that happen between these two modalities. So where emoji and language are converging to make ideational meanings, it's a relation of concurrence. And I'm drawing on two et al.'s terms. Where the meaning is interpersonal, there's a relation of resonance, and where the meaning is textual, there's a relation of synchronicity. So not only did we need to define these relations between modalities, we also need to think about the principles that we use in thinking about how they operate. So one principle that I'm drawing on in particular is the notion of minimum mapping, drawing on Zhao's work on how image and language coordinate in electronic resources. So if multiple modes co-express a dimension of a social relation, such as an activity or participants, then they can be said to form a coupling. So for example, a verbiage-image coupling. When semiotic resources co-occur in a text, their meaning potential is constrained to the region of shared meaning amongst them, and that's the minimum mapping principle. So for example, if we had a post like this, work from home, with the emoji on the end, we have a relation of concurrence between the language and the emoji. So they're both coordinating to make this meaning about working from home. And in this talk, I'm going to be looking at how do we model this, how do we think about in more detail about what the specific kinds of relations in meaning that are happening in the text. Another concept that will be useful to us is the idea of commitment. So this is how much language and emoji are each contributing to the overall meaning that's being made. Sometimes emoji are doing more of the work, sometimes language are doing more of the work. So the idea of commitment comes from Martin's concept that that it is the amount of meaning potential activated in a particular process of instantiation, in terms of the options taken up in particular discursive meanings. So how much of the meaning potential is being taken up by a particular semiotic resource. So both emoji and language can commit more or less delicate meanings depending on the context and the context. So for example here, the hot beverage emoji, somewhat underspecified. It could be hot chocolate, it could be tea, it could be coffee, it could be a macchiato, etc. And on the right here, some ridiculous Starbucks orders. So tall non-fat latte with caramel drizzle, grande iced sugar-free vanilla latte with soy milk. Okay, all of those things potentially could be meant when using this emoji in a post about your Starbucks order, for example. Okay, so we're thinking about the relative amount of commitment these different kinds of resources can enact in a text. And so, of course, it can go the other way as well. We can simply talk in language about a drink, or we can use the Apple version of the cocktail glass emoji, which specifies more about the attributes of the drink. So it seems to be a martini here with an olive in it. Okay, and if you speak to designers of emoji, they'll say that actually the amount of specificity included in emoji is quite problematic. Should it be so elaborated as to be specific in terms of the illustration, or is it better to be much more underspecified in terms of the visual, the kinds of visual meanings that are made by the way that the emoji is illustrated? So just to recap on the analytical method that we've kind of, the parts of it I've introduced so far, although I have to explain some more about the discourse semantic system of ideation in a minute. We've been drawing on corpus linguistics and discourse analysis in combination, and looking at the coordination of meaning across language and emoji through this idea of convergence, or otherwise we can think about that as intermodal coupling across modalities, how modalities converge to make meaning, and drawing on the principle of minimum mapping to hopefully achieve an elegant description of this intermodal convergence, and also the idea of commitment, looking at the relative amount of meaning potential that emoji or language take up in a particular text. And I'm also going to be drawing on this discourse semantic system of ideation for describing the kinds of meanings that I want to look at in this talk. So in particular, I'm interested in looking at patterns of meaning involving the hot beverage emoji. Part of the reason is that I like coffee, but it was also a very frequent emoji in my corpus, as people tend to talk about what they're drinking while they're working. So thinking in terms of syntagmatic relations, firstly, it's a little bit easier to start here, drawing on an approach adopted for considering how hashtags function in tweets. So in terms of the information flow of a text, we can consider where an emoji appears syntactically in the post in terms of whether an emoji appears in an initial position, so at the beginning of a post or a tweet, in integrated systems, so integrated into the lexicogrammar, or as we'll see, into the discourse semantics, or in cumulative position, so at the end of a post, along with other elements such as hashtags and other kinds of metadata that you can include. So the hot beverage emoji most commonly occurred in cumulative position in the tweets in my corpus. This included emoji that co-occurred with hashtags in this end position, as in the final two examples of this set of examples here. So we can see the hot beverage emoji at the end of the post, or before or after the hashtag in the as in the last two examples. So the next most common or frequent position was for the hot beverage emoji to occur in integrated position, where it can perform a range of functions both inside and outside the clauses and clause complexes in the text. So examples such as these. The most frequent colloquy of the hot beverage emoji was the hot beverage emoji itself. So you can see examples such as these ones, where there's multiple emoji in integrated position and in cumulative position in the text. So in the first two examples, the repetition of the emoji seems to be one of take on the meaning of upscaling quantity. So it appears to construe lots of hot beverage thing entity. Okay, they drank a lot of coffee. Rather than upscaling quantity in the last example, here we see the repetition appearing to upscale the positive attitude about tea that's in the body of the post. Okay, so boil 1 cup of water with some tea leaves, pour 1 spoon of honey and lemon juice, you will get this energy as well as an immunity booster, and the repetition there seems to coordinate with this kind of positive assessment of the benefits of tea. Okay, so now we'll focus on ideation, at the level of discourse semantics as defined within systemic functional linguistics. So we'll look at ideation in language firstly. How does the systemic functional linguistic approach model this kind of meaning? So we're looking at how experience is construed in language, acting as a theory of reality, as a resource reflecting on the world. Okay, and so in terms of the SFL technicality, we're going to be working at the level of discourse semantics, and I'm going to be just focusing on two systems in discourse semantics for this presentation, figure and element. And I'm going to be drawing on Howe's ideas about these systems, which were a development of Martin's original discourse semantics as defined in the 90s. Okay, so SFL stratifies language into a number of layers of meaning. So register or context, content or discourse semantics, and lexicogramma, and expression, so phonology and phonetics. Okay, so and then there's a realization relationships between these layers in the bottle. Okay, so register realizes discourse semantics, which realizes lexicogramma, etc. Okay, so we're going to be focusing here at the discourse semantic level, and we're going to be looking at specific systems at that level of figure and element. So in terms of discourse semantic elements, we're largely going to be looking at entities in this presentation. So here's the entity system and its categorization of the types of entities, so source entities. Ignore the emoji for the moment in these examples. I'm just explaining this in terms of the language. So they and boss, people saying things, so sources, attributed sources, for instance. Things, so coffee, objects, stuff like that. Activities, so forced injection being an activity realized as an entity. Semiotic entities such as accomplishment reports, so these are things like the product of semiosis, so a post, for example, or a tweet, or other examples of semiotic entities. Places, which are fairly obvious, so home, and time, which again is pretty clear, so pandemic times. So the configuration of an occurrence with other elements in a clause is referred to as an occurrence figure. In other words, this is a clause where some kind of activity is happening, for instance, taking a nap. The alternative choice is a state figure. So these are typically clauses describing or evaluating a situation or state of affairs rather than construing a dynamic activity sequence. So for example, working from home discourse is evaluated as so frustrating on all fronts in this second example. So we need to make a distinction in meaning between these two different types of figures. So in terms of ideational convergence, Emoji co-construed ideational meanings about working from home as both figures and elements in combination with language, and these are the examples that we're going to be looking at. So the most frequent object emoji, although as you'll see it's problematic to classify emoji based on what they look like, are these ones. So the laptop was the most frequent, you've got the money bag, house with garden, etc. Some of these were involved in advertising and tweets by bots that were quite difficult to process out of the corpus automatically. But one of the emoji, the hot beverage emoji, in this top 10 about people's personal experiences of working from home. So I chose to focus on those. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, when I looked at the concordance lines, two key semantic domains or fields in which emoji converge with language in terms of ideational meaning were apparent. So the kind of work from home field or semantic domain and the COVID-19 pandemic domain. And we're going to focus here on these hot beverage emoji. So thinking about how language and emoji can co-construe ideational meaning, if we look at this text here, drinking hot beverage emoji, if we look at it only, if we consider only the emoji on its own, what seems to be clearly realizing a thing entity. But if we think about the language and the emoji together, they form an occurrence figure where there's an activity going on, the activity of drinking the hot beverage emoji. We don't know what kind of beverage it is because it's relatively underspecified in this particular emoji. And perhaps work on semantic priming is relevant here. A speaker might be primed to interpret the semiosis following drinking as more likely to be the complement of a clause. And so there's been a range of work on semantic priming and so a small amount of work on the role of emoji in semantic priming. So the previous example was ambiguous or underdetermined or undercommitted in terms of what type of beverage the thing entity, the hot beverage emoji, was realizing. Was it tea, coffee, or some other heated beverage? But in some cases, this kind of indeterminacy is resolved through collocation with a more committed, linguistically realized thing entity. So, for example, here I am drinking too much tea with hot beverage emoji, or here stop drinking coffee, again with the hot beverage emoji. We can think about the coordination of the tea and the emoji and the coffee and the emoji as together committing their meaning of what type of beverage it actually is when the language and the emoji converge ideationally. So another example of the co-construal of an occurrence figure is this tweet here. Wish I had Zoom filters for the camera-ready WFH Zoom meetings, a series of emoji getting all glammed up, and another emoji. So this is an example of a figure co-construed in emoji and language, where the four emoji converge with the getting all glammed up in the language to realize an occurrence figure. So it's an occurrence figure about the activity of getting ready in order to be presentable for a Zoom meeting. The emoji construe as sequences of occurrences that are metonyms, realizing different aspects of getting glammed up. The woman technologist emoji appears to indicate the outcome of the activity, although interestingly did not occur at the end of the sequence as might have been expected. And then the emoji on the end seems to be enacting a more interpersonal meaning, commenting on the rest of the post. So an example where language and emoji co-construe an entity in a state figure is the tweet on the right here. Wow, I thought my work from home office was busy. The computer emoji. Okay, so there's a state figure. My work from home office was busy. Computer emoji evaluates the work from home office environment that is the projected opinion of the author. Okay, so offices can be of different types: government offices, business offices, and work from home offices. And we can have a computer or a terminal, or there are other kinds of meanings this emoji might be making. And we can see a relationship of synecdoche between the work from home office and computer, since you usually find computers in work from home offices. In other words, the computer emoji has a metonymic relationship to the work from home office place entity, appearing to enact synecdoche, since the work from home office is represented by the computer, just one aspect of the items routinely found in offices. A more complex example is this post, which bundles linguistically realized entities as adjacent emoji. And you can see that it also incorporates a video shown on the right here, of a woman dancing with her children. So what's your favourite part about working from home? For me, it's being able to have spontaneous dance parties with my tiny co-workers when I go downstairs to make coffee. And there's some emoji and some hashtags. So the activity entity, dance party, and the thing entity, coffee, converge with the hot beverage and the woman dancing emoji respectively in this post. The post also incorporates a video, as I mentioned, of a woman dancing with her children. This humorously identifies the tiny co-workers that are referenced in the body of the post. An example involving emoji repetition is a reply to a tweet about another user's breakfast choices. In this example, the repetition of the emoji echoes the plural thing entity in the verbiage. So the advantage of working from home, I enjoy my homemade latte macchiatos, and 3 hot beverage emojis. So in terms of intermodal coupling, homemade latte macchiatos in the language serves to specify the type of beverage as coffee rather than tea or some other hot drink. It also upscales the positive attitude in the post, realized in the language by advantage and enjoy. Examples of how particular connotative dimensions of the hot beverage emoji, such as, for instance, comfort and familiarity, so these are things we associate with drinking a hot beverage of some kind, can be foregrounded by the linguistic cotext. So I've got 2 examples here: love, working from home, and perfect work from home weather. The verbiage and emoji reciprocally specify each other's meaning potential to a region of shared meaning. Okay, and I've represented that visually here. Connotations of comfort and familiarity associated with the hot beverage, realized by the emoji, are foregrounded when cross-referenced with similar connotations associated with working from home. Thus, even though this region of each mode's meaning potential is typically less salient, is foregrounded when realized intermodally, so when the language and the emoji work together. So another example involving connotation is this one here: missing having coffee and endless discussions over it with my coffee mates. Hot beverage emoji today, and then they've tagged a number of their, presumably their friends. So in this example, the use of the hot beverage emoji references its common usage in text where the author is describing having a coffee with someone else. This is an example of how the fuzziness or undercommittedness of an individual emoji can be used to simultaneously construe multiple aspects of meaning. In this case, the hot beverage emoji simultaneously refers to the thing entity coffee, the classifier in the thing entity coffee mates, and the occurrence figure have a coffee. Okay, so it can do all of those different functions at once. Ideational and interpersonal functions. So I'm going to show you an example here of ideational convergence that invokes an interpersonal meaning. So Apple was always in person, but times change. There will be future pandemics. My company was 40% working from home before COVID and will be 60% or more working from home afterwards. Apple needs to move with the times or most certainly lose talent to more flexible companies that pay the same salary. And then this alarm clock emoji. So we can say that the alarm clock emoji converges with meanings about both time running out and times changing in the verbiage. From the perspective of interpersonal meaning, the emoji functions as an evaluative meta-comment on what is said in the rest of the post, functioning in a similar way to the meanings that can be achieved by, for instance, evaluative hashtags in the cumulative position in a tweet. Okay, so we've got Apple needs to move with the times or negative outcomes. So these negative outcomes might be increased competition, impact of COVID, etc. And we've got associated meanings of times changing and running out of time. And then we've got the alarm clock emoji that can also make this meaning of running out of times, meanings about clocks, time in general, etc. So there's a convergence of these meanings both in the language and in the emoji, and ideational convergence on the one hand, but this also, as it is actually functioning in the text, can invoke an interpersonal comment. So we might think of the degree of intermodal convergence of emoji and language as a climb spanning more localized cotextual convergence to more global meanings requiring more activation of context. So for instance, a mapping of coffee or tea with emoji might be a maximally localized meaning. However, some relations involve more extensive knowledge of the context. So think of those examples that I showed of comfort and familiarity being associated with coffee. So for example, consider this instance, which included a GIF of a child on a bike rapidly circling around a playground, converging with meanings about coffee causing speediness and busyness. So that's me this morning. Tuesday, that feels like Manic Monday. Tuesday thoughts, working from home, good morning, Twitter world. In this example, there is a connotative relation between the hot beverage emoji and the concept of high-speed activity or excessive manic busyness. So you might know the popular song Manic Monday, which is being referenced in this tweet. So we've got these ideas of busyness and speediness associated with the hot beverage emoji. Other potential options available from the context, or having particular cultural notion, having particular cultural ideas that particular subgroups might have, ideas of like productivity, creativity, wakefulness that have become associated with coffee as something that's been iconized in the modern world. Okay, so all of these meanings are converging intermodally in this tweet, in the language and the emoji. And here I would bring in some of my previous research into coffee tweets and the concept of iconization. So, how certain things like coffee, chocolate, wine, certain entities accrue a kind of interpersonal significance as a cultural process. So, due to the powerful cultural impact of iconization, these apparently positive properties of caffeine have great influence on the daily practices of many people. This semiotic influence results from the heady association between coffee, conversation, and companionship encountered in the coffee houses, so historically speaking. And it depends on that more than on any concrete psychopharmaceutical reality. So I now want to briefly factor in the role of images in these texts as multimodal performances. So many of the posts in my corpus involved what I refer to as coffee selfies. So there was a consistent pattern in the corpus of embedding images of coffee into posts that also included the hot beverage emoji, together with that discourse about dimensions of the user's visual perspective or sensory experience. And many of these images are inferred or implied selfies. So they're selfies where the face of the photographer isn't present, but traces of the photographer's perspective are present. So that maybe their hand around a coffee cup or a coffee cup right in the foreground of an image, suggesting the presence of the photographer. So that invoke the perspective of a photographer without showing the photographer's face. So in posts such as this, not a bad view from today's office of choice, my happy morning view, my Wednesday motivation, boil 1 cup of water with some lemon tea. Boil 1 cup of water with some tea leaves. Pour 1 spoon of honey and lemon juice. You'll get this energy as well as an immunity booster. So text like this. So here is an example of what I would technically see as a form of potentially coffee selfie, if that is a coffee in that mug. We can define various kinds of intermodal relations that are happening depending on the level of granularity of analysis that we're undertaking when approaching a post like this. So this post can be interpreted as involving 3 key intermodal relations in terms of the ideational meaning as it is being distributed across the image, text, emoji, and tags. So as these different resources are committing different amounts of meaning to make the overall text. So depending on the level of granularity of analysis, we can define different kinds of ideational intermodal relations happening in posts such as the one you can see on your screen here. And drawing on Zhao's minimum mapping idea and some of the relations that she establishes, we can see here a circumstantiating relation. So the circumstantiation of an occurrence figure realized in the body of the post as working from home on a Sunday, with a laptop emoji and the hot beverage emoji construing meanings about drinking a hot beverage at a laptop. Okay, so the different modalities contribute these different meanings, but the overall relation between the verbiage and the image is a circumstantiation relation. We can also see an exemplifying relation between the emoji and the image co-construing entities. So the hot beverage emoji and the laptop emoji co-exemplify the image of the laptop if we assume part of the laptop stand is visible in the corner. And the mug containing a dark liquid, that is most likely coffee. Okay, so there's a mapping there between those emoji and the 2 entities that we can see in the image. We can also see an identification relationship between the linguistic thing entity, the magic mug from this particular designer, which identifies the mug by naming and tagging the designer. So there's a coordination of ideational meaning between that part of the post and the image of the coffee. And the other emoji, the sparkles and the heart, are obviously doing interpersonal work relating to evaluating how nice this mug is. So here's another example of ideational intermodal relations in a post that involves an implied selfie. Okay, so the photographer is implied by the visual composition of the image. So here we see circumstantiation relation enacted in relation to a state figure. So the image functions to circumstantiate a state figure about the author's opinion on the view from her working location. We can see exemplification of entities happening in the relation between the image and the emoji. So the sequence of hot beverage, laptop and books emoji co-exemplify these entities in the image. And if you look closely at the laptop screen, you can see books for topics on the screen. So the books appearing on the laptop screen as well as in the verbiage books for topics. Okay, so those are being co-exemplified by those emojis that you can see at the top. Except for the sunglasses emoji, which isn't present, but implies, I mean, there's no sunglasses in the image, but the emoji implies that the photographer is potentially wearing sunglasses. So the implied photographer in this implied selfie may be wearing sunglasses, and the other emoji has an interpersonal function here. Okay, so emoji raise interesting theoretical issues about what counts as a unit of meaning and a semantic relation in the multimodal analysis of social media texts. So throughout this paper, we've drawn on discourse semantic relations that were originally developed for work on language to see how far we could push this modelling to account for emoji language semiosis, to account for how emoji and language converge to make ideational meanings. So we've explored how emoji and language can function as semiotic resources that coordinate to make various kinds of discourse semantic meanings together. So for instance, the way that coffee in the language and the hot beverage emoji in a visual modality converge to construe a thing entity is the simplest example that we've looked at. And we've looked at more complicated examples with how language, emoji, and tags and images all work together to coordinate ideational meaning, to make ideational meaning in texts that are occurring across different kinds of social contexts on social media platforms. So thank you for listening to this presentation. If you're interested in the work that I've presented today, you can see on the left here a paper that I've written that was recently published in Discourse, Context and Media together with Lorenzo Loggi, which is specifically about the working from home tweets, that corpus that we've looked at today. Also another paper with the same co-author in New Media and Society. Here we present the broader framework that I've drawn on in this talk, where we cover all of the different kinds of functions that emoji can enact across experiential, ideational, interpersonal, and textual meanings. So how emoji and language jointly construe ideational meaning, how resources in one mode can serve to foreground particular regions in other modes, and how attitudinal meaning realised by emoji appears to differ from the prosodic patterning of linguistic attitude. Okay, so that's in that second article. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak and for your time today.